So let me start off by introducing myself. I am Paige Cottingham Streeter. I am the Executive Director of the Japan-U.S Friendship Commission. The Commission is a federal agency solely dedicated to supporting and sustaining the U.S.-Japan relationship. And we do these through grants that we award to American and Japanese institutions. We are also proud to be a supporter of the arts, not only through our institutional grants, but also through our U.S. Japan Creative Artist Fellowship. It's an annual residency opportunity that's been going on for decades, where we invite American artists to have the opportunity to spend time in Japan, where they can learn about Japanese culture and also have an cultural exchange with their peers in the arts community. Our collaborative partners, I should mention, are the National Endowment for the Arts and also the International House of Japan, based in Tokyo. The Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission and NEA in 2019 decided that we wanted to offer something new and unique in recognition of the 2020 Olympic Games. And so we decided that in the interest of highlighting the spirit of the Olympics, diversity and unity in sports, among other things, we thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to highlight the important bilateral collaboration and partnership between Japan and the United States. And so we launched and started the Nichibei Creative Artist Program. Well, the Olympics, as we know, were postponed, and so has been our creative artist residency for this particular year, but it has not stopped nonetheless, the energy and the commitment on the part of our artists to be able to persevere and to find new ways of connecting with the arts community in Japan and in the United States. And so this is our effort to continue the dialogue without being in the same physical space. And so this is a conversation tonight that's a third in a series of virtual programming that we're offering. And we're delighted that this evening we have Mr. Cameron McKinney, who's based in New York, and Mr. Toru Shimazaki, based in Kobe, to join us in conversation to talk about their agreement to collaborate, to talk about their creative artistic styles as choreographers, and the ways that they're inspired and motivated through the visual, specifically the performing arts. So COVID-19 may have disrupted some of our work, but it certainly has not created a reason not to continue and to persevere. So I find that our artists have inspired us in ways of how to be persistent and how to overcome challenges. And so I'm excited to hear this evening personally how they've been able to manage to do that. Before I move the program to our wonderful moderator, I want to thank the National Endowment for the Arts and thank the International House of Japan for their ongoing support, especially during these challenging times. I also want to be sure to thank our artists, not only Cameron, but the cohort of others who have patiently been waiting for the opportunity to experience the full cultural exchange that the U.S. Japan Creative Artist Program is intended to serve. And I'm also delighted and have great appreciation that our wonderful moderator, Miho Walsh, has decided to join us again and lead us through an interesting discussion. Miho was most recently the executive director of the Asian Cultural Council. She's had a wonderful career and experience supporting the U.S.-Japan relationship, and we're so grateful for her for joining us this evening to continue that work in this conversation. Thank you again for joining us. And Miho, thank you so much. I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thank you very much, Paige. And thank you again for that very warm and kind introduction. I think we were talking earlier that this was a conversation among friends, and I really appreciate that sort of energy to this evening's event. I also want to thank the institutional partners for making tonight's discussion possible. And again, it's just such a deep, deep honor and privilege to moderate this conversation between Cameron McKinney and Toru Shimazaki. Through tonight's event, Perseverance Through Motion, we hope to share with you insights into both of these individuals, into their professional careers and their personal experiences that have shaped who they are and their work as artists. And then we'd like to talk about the vision for their collaboration. So as Paige mentioned, this is the third talk in our series featuring the 2019 Nichibei artists. And I've been personally especially delighted and happy to have such a dynamic audience. I attend a lot of webinars and have participated as moderator in several, but this particular audience that comes around for the Nichibei artists is truly dynamic and I think very smart and inquisitive and curious. And so while we plan to cover many topics with Cameron and Shimazaki sensei, I'd really like to reiterate again, we'd love your questions. We've left ample time for a robust Q&A at the end, and we welcome you to make comments in the chat. So with that, I am really gonna just jump right in, and I'm gonna start with Cameron. Cameron, can you sort of start us off by telling us a little bit about the sort of kikkake or spark plug sort of impetus into what attracted you first about Japanese language and culture and sort of pursuing studies in it?
Sure. Well, thank you guys all for coming and for organizing and for being a part of continuing to make art happen. It happens on both sides of the field, on stage and off. So thank you guys for being here. So I started with Japanese when I was 13. I kind of stumbled across some music. And being from where I am in Memphis, Tennessee, there wasn't that much to do for someone of my age if you're not really into blues and jazz music. So I started off, I went to the library, you know, I got the self-help books, the Let's Learn the 26 Characters of Hiragana, all those things. And it was kind of just a hobby for me. And then my mom, who's a very social and talkative person, she was describing this kind of new idea, this new hobby that I was doing to friends of hers. And they recommended the Concordia Language Villages in Minnesota, which you may or may not be familiar with. But essentially it's a summer program where they throw you in the woods and they take all your electronics and they just speak the target language at you for a month. So the goal is to try to cram a year's worth of the language study into 1 month's time. And it's for like high schoolers and middle schoolers, I think, too. So just kind of on a whim, I did that when I was the summer before my freshman year of high school. It was my first year there. Went to the woods, did Japanese for a month, and just kind of fell in love and kept going back to the camp every year in high school. Wound up being a counselor there after my junior year. And this kind of hobby quickly turned into kind of the main leading passion for where my life was going. And so when I went to college, I went to Middlebury College in Vermont, which is famed for their language programs. And I went there specifically just to study Japanese. And then as I was there, kind of stumbled, as I tend to do, I guess now I think about it, stumbled into these larger passions, stumbled into dance there. So upon graduation, creating the company was really just about melding these two things that have been the guiding forces in my life and career.
Fantastic. And it sounds really like it was sort of happenstance, or you sort of, as you say, stumbled into this. But was there a particular, I'm curious, at sort of Ike no Mori no Ike, Concordia College language program, was there a particular aspect of Japanese culture that you felt passionately about? Was it a particular subject? Was it a particular part, or just the whole experience?
I think it was the whole experience. I mean, I think whenever I hear it, I get mystified by it, you know, and just there's always something that I'm not going to understand. And I think I like that feeling that it's never really complete. For me, my journey through it is never really complete. I also like that it was really difficult, and that you know, when there's very few people doing it. You know, at the same time, I'm a twin, so I was trying to not take the same classes as my sister because we've been forced into doing everything. So she was like, I'm taking Spanish, and I was like, other direction. Let me go take Japanese and like the hardest language possible. But yeah, I think it's the whole experience too, though.
Makes sense. Amazing. And now, you know, I find that throughout your work and your experience, language, the Japanese language really has played a big part in sort of who you are and your art. And the experience sort of led you to come to the understanding. I mean, I find it so interesting. You sort of started with this deeply immersive linguistic study, and then you discovered a universal language in dance and realized sort of you could express through dance and movement, and you didn't need the language. But then at the same time, the language plays such a big part in your dance. So it's this wonderful sort of almost full circle aspect to it. Can you tell us about choosing the name Kizuna for your dance company?
Sure. Well, you know, in speaking to the point you were just making too, you know, Kizuna is that word for those kind of intangible bonds between people. So in my training, I was very fortunate to come into the dance world through the lens of teachers who prioritize community. So it's not just about technique, it's not just about performance, it's about the community that you create on stage and off stage. And the community that you create off stage translates to those intangible bonds that you can sense between performers on stage. So it really is kind of a wholesome all-around experience. But I mean, speaking to the universal language, I've always been a huge lingophile. I've done like French, Chinese, Italian, you know, Japanese, Spanish, like everything I could grab my hands on growing up. And so when I kind of stumbled across dance, I was really attracted to it because of the universality of the language. But speaking to that point I just said, like I have that universal language of dance, but that's not the entire experience I'm trying to curate, especially when it comes to the company. So, and also relating the company to others. So having the spoken language is what helps build those communities between myself and perhaps artists in Japan off stage, so that when we come together on stage, you can really sense that there's a connection. We're not just two strangers walking on stage and doing something. There's a trust that you can see when someone goes into someone else's arms or goes past them or jumps over them. Like there's a trust that's built up on stage, but also off stage too.
So interesting. And when you sort of create work, a lot of times, I mean, it's about the community and it's about the expression itself. And it's about sort of wanting to convey a certain feeling or emotion, I think. And a lot of your work has, you've titled some of your work with Japanese words. And we always run into the issue of words that are just not translatable. But I'm curious, behind sort of creating work, do you think of the word in Japanese and then create movement towards expressing that word? Or do you think about sort of movement and then find the perfect Japanese word to describe it and title it?
Yeah. It's a difficult question. So most of the times with the word has a direct relation to the actual work itself, right? So most times I'm not, I say most times because I'll give you an exception in a second, but most times I'm not seeing a Japanese word and then creating a whole work around that word, with the exception of like one work we did called Ikigai, which was a series of shorter dances that were inspired by these kind of untranslatable words within the Japanese language, like words that are really hard for us to try to translate as English speakers. And that was a collection of short dances around these different kinds of words. But most times, like if we're doing, if we're making a work about a particular topic, then the title is either a direct translation of that topic or a word that relates to something that happens in the dance, the themes of the dance already. That makes sense.
Yes, that does. Okay. And sort of your movement, or really it is a movement, but your sort of goal at large is to create this community, this greater community through dance. And cultural exchange has played such a huge part of your sort of professional dance experience. And you have taken sort of the aspects of Buto and sort of melded that with street dance and form, and really sort of the cultural exchange journey continues for you throughout. And really Kizuna sounds like a purposefully intentional mission to create ongoing cultural exchange and create a greater community. But can you tell us a little bit about sort of blending these two very different dance?
Sure. Well, let me start off by saying that it's still very much in process. There's nothing set in stone or codified, or there's no Bible to this quite yet. But so my interest in Buto actually started in college. I wound up writing my thesis on the intersections of Buto and street dance at Middlebury. And I think keep stumbling into things. I kind of stumbled across it as a dance and Japanese joint major, and I had to find a way to combine the thesis. And someone at the college had recommended me look into Buto. And so at first, I wasn't a fan at all. Coming from a street dance background, it seemed like basically like everything that was happening in the Buto world was like anathema to anything I was trying to accomplish. But I had, the great pleasure of studying Buto under a number of different Buto teachers and Buto influenced teachers, both in college and then through the Asian Cultural Council grant, and also in other times I was there. And what I came to understand, or what I feel like I came to understand, is that both Buto and street dance have so many similarities. I mean, they were both started in similar time periods, but at least in my mind, they both come from this idea of revolution, right? On the Buto side, the revolution against West ideals resulting from the Western occupation, and then also traditional Japanese beauty ideals, and then on the street dance side, also that kind of revolution revolting against the ideas of what was termed aesthetically pleasing at the time. And then they both have these different connections in terms of the erasure of the self. Buto, depending on who you ask, with the white powder representing the atomic bomb, asked for the atomic bomb, but also this idea of emptying the self to be able to transform into another idea. And then street dance on the other side, having Black and Latinos in the Bronx trying to fight against the erasure of their culture and the gentrification of their neighborhoods. So there's a lot of different connects that I find in there. But what I'm trying to work toward establishing in terms of my longer term dance style is something that both draws from these styles physically, but also somatically and also psychologically too. Something that has, like Ko Muraboshi said, it's like this balance. The dance is the balance. The balancing is dancing, right? So trying to find this inner balance of the inner mind states, like your inner psyche, but also physically. And I think Buto does a really great job of pulling all of these parts of your inner psyche from the inside to the outside. And then street dance kind of has this external idea that then retranslates to the inside. So it's like trying to find this circularity between both of them that combines to create some kind of new style and aesthetic. But all of that is a lot to give to one dancer who just wants to know the steps sometimes. So it's a work in progress.
Yeah, how do you do it? I mean, but you have been, which is really fantastic, and we'll see some of that. And in fact, maybe right now would be a good time in which we've prepared a few videos to just give people a sort of visual idea of Kizuna's work. And so if we could showcase the Kizuna company's trailer, we can share that with our audience. I was just saying, I was watching both of your facial expressions as we watched the trailer, and knowing that both of you are educators, I was seeing your sort of educator eye follow movements, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. But Cameron, I'm curious, just in watching your trailer, part of the Kizuna company's mission is to share about Japanese culture. And you, in wanting to pursue that mission, have to sort of have your dance company members experience Japanese culture and be able to sort of embody Japanese culture and then translate it and then perform it, or sort of have an appreciation for it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Has that been a challenge, or?
So my goal isn't necessarily for them to embody the culture. My goal is for them to appreciate it in the ways that I do, and to be my light's going on, and to be able to speak to the themes of the works that they're performing in. So I mean, I don't expect them all to be intense researchers or to do a crash course in the 16 years I've been studying the language. That's all a lot to ask for them until I can pay them full time. Yep. But they do things like this summer when we have a residency at the Middle Bay Japanese Summer Language School. They'll be in intensive Japanese language classes, every morning, like those kinds of things. So just when I work with them, I am expressing to them my experiences in navigating the culture, what I've experienced actually being and living and working in Japan. And then I'm also speaking to them about the specific aspects that I'm exploring. But I'm not requiring them to be embodiments of that culture. I just want them to appreciate where it comes from.
Thank you for that clarification. And before we move to Shimazaki-sensei, I think it's maybe a valid point to make right now is that, there was a very interesting article written by one of our institutional partners, the NEA, back, I think it was in February 2020. And you talked a little bit about the difference between sort of cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. And, it's a topic we talk about a lot when we're involved in cultural exchange. How do you navigate the fine line between what becomes sort of, or can be construed as cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation? Sure. And I really liked what you said about that, but if you could share with the audience a little bit about your process, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult, it's a constantly difficult navigation, and it's a constant navigation. But I come up at it similar to what I just said, which is, I'm not asking them to be Japanese, right? And I'm also not prescribing culture or prescribing history in the works that I'm making, right? I'm not making works and I'm saying like, this is how it is, or this is how it should be. I'm not doing that in my works. What I'm doing in my works is taking specific aspects and then using those as jumping off points for adding my own personal context and experience. And some of those delve deeper into the language and culture than others. But I also come at it from my now 16, is that right? Yeah. I just had a birthday, so I'm like, it's now 16 years, 16 years of engaged study, of embodied study of the language and of the culture. But I don't expect my dancers to speak as if they have lived these experiences that I have lived, or speak as if they have lived these experiences that Japanese people may have experienced and lived, right? I'm giving them these tools as artistic jumping off points in the same way they are for me in my choreography, without prescribing how things should be or how things are for a culture that's not my own.
And I love how in your own cultural exchange experiences, when you've gone to Japan and you've studied a particular form with various masters and trainers and teachers, it comes from a place of constantly sort of checking in with them, constantly a conversation, a dialogue that continues, so that there is that involvement, really, that sort of partnership or collaboration that continues throughout your own artistic and sort of research journey. And that sort of leads me to a good segue to move to Shimazaki sensei, because Shimazaki sensei, you also are a choreographer and a sort of dancer choreographer who has had many cultural exchange experiences. And you credit sort of going to Canada initially and really learning a lot of your technique and spending many years there. And I wonder if you could start off by sort of telling us a little bit about that initial time in Canada and your experience then.
Originally, I went to Canada not to really study dance. I was actually a horseback rider, on a British style horseback rider. And my teacher, horseback riding teacher, he told me when I was a teenager that you shouldn't stay in Japan. You should go abroad. I don't know why. It was maybe he saw my personality that he thought that I should go, you know. But anyway, my sister was dancing since she was 3. She was studying classical ballet. And she's 5 years older than I am. So the ballet was always around me because of my sister. And when I left in 1981 to Canada, thinking that maybe I will continue horseback riding, I arrived and I went to some stable, and things, they were not as I kind of imagined, you know. Then I don't really remember clearly, but then I kind of opened up Yellow Pages in Canada, and I found this ballet school, and I started to dance there. And a year later, I moved to different school, and I went this one of school, and let me explain. My teacher, he was originally from Singapore, and he was actually the first Oriental student who got into Royal Ballet School in England with full scholarship in history. He was the first one. So he studied in Royal Ballet School. Then in England, when he went to England, for first time he saw Russian ballet in London. And he fell in love because he was a male dancer. He wanted to study this Russian technique. So he stopped going to Royal Ballet School. He went to study with a very famous teacher who moved from Russia to England. Her name was Madame Legat. And then my teacher studied, and when he was 16, he got a contract with the Festival Ballet with Anton Dorin, director, when he was 16. And I think he got this contract like in spring, and he had a time before he started his contract in September. So he went back to Singapore after a few years later. Then he was reading a paper in Singapore. He saw this article that this Russian masters coming into China and starts a national ballet school based on Russian technique in China. And he was from a very wealthy family in Singapore, and he told his father, "I want to go to China, study more about Russian ballet." And I remember my teacher said, his father said, you know, in China, there's not even enough food to survive. And my teacher said, "I don't care. I want to study this Russian technique." So he left to China. He broke this contract and he left to China. Then Cultural Revolution came in China. Everything got closed. So my teacher stayed in China as a foreigner during the Cultural Revolution. And when this Cultural Revolution finished, he escaped to Canada. So my teacher was like this, and so he was a Singaporean. But what I'm trying to say, he was a real artist, you know, very, very art. And if he didn't stay in China, I'm sure he was recognized as one of the most amazing artists of that time in classical ballet field, but he was nobody then. But I was lucky enough to meet him after a year later in '82, and I got accepted to study with him. And that's how I started dance, yes.
Mm. How interesting to have a mentor who really also had that very, very global experience and so many influences. And, you know, the interesting thing I think about cultural exchange and programs that support the effort and ability to have totally immersive experiences, you know, it is so interesting because it's about identity. It shapes who you are as a person and influences your worldview. You know, oftentimes in cultural exchange, I think we think about learning about the country that we go to, but the impact that another culture has on oneself and one's perception of one's own culture is so interesting. In that, Shimazaki sensei, when you spent your many, many years in Canada, do you feel in learning this sort of European or sort of ballet technique, did you feel Japanese, or did you feel, did that not play that much of a part in your learning in terms of just your in terms of sort of identity?
Very good question, but very difficult to answer. Because these things, I think, shows without me, like, this is not in my consciousness. But for instance, my choreography, when I go to Europe or I go to North America, all the dancers, when they start to study my choreography, different part of the body aches, start to have pain than usual choreography that they're doing. Because I think my choreography is very down. My weight has to be down. It's not up, even though I studied classical, but it's not that. But this is, I think, finding out it's a lot to do with me being agricultural based people, not I just say, no, how do you say this? Nomadic people. Doesn't make any sense. You guys are riding a horse while we are planting the rice. And this is in my gene that it puts my weight down.
Interesting.
And without me being a conscious, that information that I have in my DNA comes out when I start to do something. Or like my choreography has a lot of movement with the arms. I never realized this with myself, but when I was choreographing in Geneva, when I was younger, one of the principal dancers there, his name is Mark Wan. He danced with Matsek. He was a principal dancer with Matsek Company, and he was a principal dancer with Morris Bejal Company. He retired actually with my piece. He came up to me, he said, "Toru, I can never remember all the movement you do with your arms. You have so much movement with the arms. I never realized this myself." But then later, I was speaking with one of the Prince of Japan. He passed away, unfortunately, Prince Takamado. And he mentioned to me, he said, Toru-san, any culture which is agricultural based people, their dance has so much movement with the arms. Because in olden days, people had to dance in a rice field. So the legs were stuck in mud. So the culture naturally led them to use their arms to connect with a god, you know. But all the nomadic people, they use a lot of legs to dance. Their legs are free. So without me being conscious, when I started to do choreography, all that things comes out. So it's nothing that, you know, that it's not in here, but it's really in my body, I think.
So interesting. And maybe now would be a good time to take a look at the excerpt. We have a compilation of Shimazaki Sensei's work. And so if we could run that reel and give our audience a visual. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. I changed my earphones. Is this better?
Yeah, I hear you.
It comes up. Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, it seems like we're at, thank you so much, Shimazaki Sensei. I think we got a real taste of your work and choreography. And I think we'll start opening up to questions from the audience. I know a few of them have already come in inside the chat. And I want to make sure we get to all of the questions that are asked. So a first question to both panelists, if you'll allow me. An audience member writes, I'd love to know both your relationship to music and process of choices for sound. Could you speak a little bit about that? And maybe we'll start with Shimazaki Sensei.
There's no fixed answer for that.
Okay.
Because I always think that to really create something is really to forget something. You have to forget everything to create. So you find maybe like even a relationship with music, you find certain way that, okay, now tell me, my answer is if it's a little bit not answering the real question. But for instance, like sometimes music plays a big part of the piece because maybe I find this music and I really want to do something with this music. But sometimes I start without music. I start just a movement and then try to find a music which suit the piece, right? Or sometimes I work with the composers. And in that time, sometimes a composer gives me a music first, or I make the movement first and then show to the composer and try to ask him to make music, or her ask, you know, but then piece finishes. Then I try to do I try not to use the same way again. So it's, and let me tell you, like I just created a piece in March. It's a new piece. It's called Blood and Steel. What I did was I had a composer, and he created first big chunk of music, not big, maybe like 6.5 minutes of music. And I started to choreograph and I finished it all, right? Then I went into the second part, that he created the second part music. Then I realized first part all wrong. So I told him, I'm sorry, but I have to throw everything away. I'm not gonna use this music. He was a little bit shocked because choreography was finished already. But I said, it's not working. This is not, I know it's not good. And he was creating already, he was creating the second one. So I finished. And then he created third music. But then all of a sudden I changed my mind. I said, I have to use classical music now. So so it's, it's just like that. So it's very hard for me to answer this question because it is different every time. And also, even the way I treated music is right, then it doesn't necessarily mean that I will continue doing the same way or having the same relationship with music. I try to forget what I did and try to find, or sometimes I create a whole piece. Then when everything finished, I change the music. Because that's the only way now I can find myself unexpected. Do you understand? I'm so bold with the way that I am with music. So I have to find a way to just make something that is unpredictable for me. So it's,
I see.
it's just
Yes, Cameron, you're nodding your head and sort of, I feel like you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the exact same for me. I come from a street dance background, and when I create, I pretty much always have house music blasting, like the entire process. And up until I choose music, basically, it's just, I don't have anything else to put on. I like house music, let's do house music. But also when I create movement, most often I start with movement first, and I'll play the house music and I'll vibe to the house music and work with that. But at least in the company repertory, I don't think we have any pieces with house music to it at all. So it's like I'll make like 15 minutes of stuff and I won't have music, so I'll just play house music and have that rhythm going. And then the reason I was not in my head so much is because in the last larger ensemble work that we did, I had a similar situation where I made the second half and then I realized the first half was all wrong. And I went back and I scrapped the first 10 minutes and then reset and then started from scratch and then did that all over again. But that first 10 minutes was done to house music until I switched it toward the end. And then now it's done to like a classical orchestral kind of feel, which I don't listen to like regularly, but I was just trying to find something different and something new, And I also think about when the company is presenting work, because we normally present an hour and a half long repertory program, I don't want the works to blend into each other, So I'm thinking, all right, I know I have 2 repertory works that have classical to it. What if we have one work that has stand-up comedy and poetry in it. We have another work that has like rock music in it. Like there's a lot of different ways that we can approach it. So for me, it's also like trying to forget what I did last time and trying to find a new and unexpected way to have a relationship to the music that we're using.
It's so interesting how your experiences sort of come together in this, and in fact, the original collaboration between the 2 of you. Let's talk about that a little bit. Originally, this is the first time the Nichibei artists were to get together and actually produce a work in collaboration as a team. And that was going to be done in sort of the spirit of the themes of the Olympics. And now I know for the 2 of you, you haven't had a chance to work, to spend that much time working together. It's still very much in process, and you're still talking to each other at the early stages. But we do have a performance that I believe you did at the ambassador's residence in Tokyo on the collaboration. And so maybe if we can show that piece, and then we'll talk about your collaboration together.
And if I could just say about the video too, very briefly before we start, and just give some props where props are due. So Sayo-san and I think met for the first time that morning of the show.
Wow.
And I think, Sayo-san, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had maybe an hour or so, an hour or two. And we just, she brought work from Shimazaki sensei, and I brought part of my solo, which you saw clips of in the other video. But we just showed up and we were like, hi, I'm this person. And she's like, hi, I'm this person. And we just connected over the course of an hour and so, made a little bit together and then put it together for an evening show. So it was just a kind of a wild ride of an experience, and obviously a very early stages as to what the potential of the collaboration will be. But I just want to give props to Sayo-san while she's there.
Fantastic. And just to clarify for the audience, Sayo-san is Shimazaki sensei's student, and very much was a big part of this initial first encounter, if you will. All right, great. Thank you. phenomenal. You met Sayo-san for the first time an hour before that. It's
earlier that morning. We had like an hour or so rehearsal.
It is so phenomenal. I think the power of connection and art. I mean, just amazing. But maybe a good point to start is about. Can you tell us about the music? Actually, let's pick up where we just had that last question. Did you choose the music together for this piece?
Well, it was a combination of two of our works. So the opening part was the tail end of a work that that Shimazaki-san created with Sayo-san, and then the latter half was a segment of a solo that I had created beforehand also. So we're kind of bringing these two parts of ourselves together, and then we melded them in the center with what we had created earlier that morning. If that makes sense.
It does. And you could, I mean, to my untrained eye, it was blended so well together. It almost, I don't know if I could pinpoint the point where it's, oh, okay, that was Cameron's piece, that was Shimazaki-sensei's piece, you know? Mm-hmm. And tell us about how this collaboration might lead to the vision you have for your project together, or actually originally sort of the intention of the project and how you wanted to go about it, and then maybe sort of where you can take it now. Cameron, can I pose that question to you?
Yeah. So in its original format, our goal was to have myself travel to Kobe to work with Shimazaki Sensei and his dancers and create this work with them. I'm doing the base skeleton of the idea. So create this work with them in the spring. I would come back to New York and then reset it on my company here. And then in the end, culminating performance, we would have both companies performing at the same time. So every dancer would have their kind of Japanese or American counterpart, through which they're having this exchange of ideas and of personal histories. And over the course of the creation of the work, we get to learn more. Each person gets to learn more about kind of their counterpart as we go toward that culminating performance as a base kind of structure. Did I answer the question? Sorry.
Yes, it does. It does. And Shimazaki-sensei, you had talked about how you found this really interesting when we were talking about a week ago. You were saying sort of having the counterpart in each company play the other part, and how that really sort of solicited an interesting dynamic. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
I've never done this, but I have seen a lot of movies that the scripts are written by several people, not one person. And I always imagine, like, how does that work? Like, you know, you write, like, let's say, like, if Cameron and I are, let's say, writing a story or something. So I write first 3 pages. And then when I'm stuck, I give it to Cameron. And then he continued the story. And then when he's stuck, he give me the paper back. And then I, you know, and I think when some of the movies that I was very impressed in the past that was written by a few people, and I always try to imagine, like, what does that mean? Like, or, you know, how to do one thing with 3 people. So I don't know how it will be for us, but I think it's kind of nice, because when you're creating something that you get stuck, you know, it never goes so smoothly. You always, there's a point that where you just, so sometimes you have to go back and then cancel the end part. So you now, you know, able to keep going, right? So it's nice, I think, in that way, in that sense. But I also start to think, because I love very much of, for me, making a solo is drawing a picture with just a pencil. So, but if it's not solo, like if it becomes more than 2 dancers, then I'm no more with just a pencil. I have a color now. And I always believe this, that if somebody wants to really try to be a choreographer, like for instance, my student asked me, like, you know, I always really insist, I always tell them, do a lot of solo work. Because it's very necessary for you to work with one body, which is like with just a pencil, to draw. Like Picasso, you know, he did with the pencil every day, 8 hours, over 8 hours. Right. So when you are giving the color, you are capable of using all that, you know. But anyway, it will be more than one dancer, this project. So what I'm trying to say is that when you have one body, then you cannot really against go gravity. Also the depth possibility, very different. With one body you can only do something like this with a depth. But when it becomes 2 body, 3 body, you can play with that. And I love designing this depth. This is my interest. I love to do this. I like to work on that, right? So in the beginning, I thought, okay, just like writing a story, Cameron-san make one part, then I continue. Then I thought, no, that's not the way that we should do. We should actually do, we should work on the same part, but for instance, like Cameron-san will make one movement, then I try to weave on that movement, the depth. I think that is for me very interesting to do this, because it will maybe give me a chance to do something completely different, because the base thing is not mine. And I try to weave something onto this design that which force me to go to unusual place. Yeah.
Very interesting and so collaborative. And it's sort of these intertwinings of process and of the particular passions you have and the particular interests you have in terms of choreography and creation. And I wonder, we had a comment in the chat box about, actually from another Nichibei artist, Sue Mark had just commented about how there must be so many interesting stories. And what you're also trying to do, as I understand it, is interweave personal stories of the members of your ensemble. And how do you do that? Cameron, I'm gonna ask you the difficult question of the process behind that and capturing. I mean, oftentimes, you know, I think in our interactions with artists, we always recognize the exceptional, unique ability of artists to be storytellers, to be these extraordinary individuals who can really show us what is possible, the way the world is and the way the world can be. And so much of that is through storytelling. And Cameron, can you give us your insights about that?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the really exciting and magical things about dance in particular is that, you know, even when you're dancing as a member of an ensemble, what you're presenting in your own body is so personal, right? Because everybody is going to be a little bit different. Even if you're in complete unison, everybody's going to be a little bit different. Everybody comes from a very different movement background, and then this also, obviously comes from a very, very different personal background. So part of what creating an ensemble, creating those kind of intangible bonds that you can experience between performers on stage is, like I mentioned before, those performers getting to actually know each other. So that we don't come to that final performance and all I know is just your name, right? So understanding how one body interacts, right? If both sides are attempting to learn the same thing, right? Excuse me. If both sides are attempting to learn the same thing, right, there's going to be a push and pull in terms of what one body can do versus another, because our body types are going to be very different and our backgrounds will be very different. So there has to be a middle meeting ground, right, both physically, but also, there's interchange between the stories. So I have to know this person and where this person comes from and what this person has been through in order to better understand why and how their body is moving that way, right? And then the same thing has to happen vice versa. And so by the time we get to this ending point, we know more about each other than just our name and our favorite food. We know what experiences have created this person that we're dancing alongside. If that makes sense.
Yes. Shimazaki-san, you're nodding your head, and I believe you might have made a comment, but you were on mute. So would you like to share some thoughts?
I just want somebody to translate this question in Japanese. I'm so curious how they would, and if I turn on this tsuyak part, there's this Japanese, right?
Yeah.
So do you think it's possible? Just let me hear the translation about this question first.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I think our original question was talking about sort of storytelling and artists having the unique capacity to share stories, and how both of you in this project wanted to incorporate these personal stories throughout the work. So the question is sort of, how are you going to do that? And also, when it comes to storytelling, what are your thoughts about this collaboration?
Okay, so this is a very good question. I really want to know who made this question, because this has been big question all my life. It's a very, very difficult thing. It almost, you can say, the person. I really recently, this past maybe couple of years, I kind of got hang of this. I now, when I'm lucky, I feel I actually can go into the heart of audience and just scratch their heart. I feel this. I'm able to do that sometimes. But if someone asks me, how did you do that? I don't know. This is really, when you say narrative, because the word narrative, yeah, it really makes you feel like this is something that you can really actually explain with the words. But in dance, you can't really do that, because that is the meaning of existence of dance, actually. Because you can't really, dance should express something that cannot be expressed by words. That is the most variable part of dance. But yet, some of the greatest the piece of choreography, they have a power of this being a narrative. Yeah. And it is it's not something that you can really do unless, like a ballet, you unless you're doing a story thing. I can only say, well, first of all, what I want to say is, yeah, that's the thing that we are not sure if we are able to do it with this production. We're aiming for, I don't know if we can do it because it's something that it's, as a choreographer, it's one of the most, I think, difficult goal to reach, that being narrative in your piece somehow. Very difficult. But I only can say this is the creator's depth as a person. You can only reach this area when you live life fully. That's the only thing make it possible. Maybe some genius people have naturally, I don't know, but really very, yes. So in that way, this is a very good question, but it's a very difficult question.
Yes, yes. And we can, there's, I think, so many layers to this conversation in terms of storytelling and of narrative and of creative process and what it takes. And as you say, maybe there have been some masters in the past who have done it, but certainly in the future, thinking about sort of the next generation of choreographers and dancers, it certainly sounds like it will be one of the challenges for people to take on.
Also, it doesn't mean some choreographer has done it, or it means he can do it every time or she can do it every time. It doesn't mean that way. It's not only being narrative. I always say to the dancers, the insecurity of choreographer is the choreographer can make a great piece one day. The next piece he create can be very, very bad. The choreographers always, we are very insecure because we know there's a possibility of that. But let's say dancers, they feel that too, maybe in everyday life. You go to the class and say, some dancers in the class, they say, oh, I cannot do anything today. But it's not true. If I look at dancers, they feel in their body, today is very good or today is bad. But from outside to look, like for instance, easiest way is classical ballet. If there's a male dancer who can do a 10 pirouette, he can never wake up in the morning and say, I don't even know how to do double pirouette. Never. It never goes down that much. But choreographer can. It can, it's possible. So that's what makes choreographer very insecure. A very famous story, the director of the New York City Ballet, George Balanchine, very famous, world famous choreographer. One day he created such a bad piece in a Lincoln set that everybody was leaving during the performance. And the person said to Balanchine, Mr. B, look how many people are leaving. And he said, yeah, but look how many people are staying. So choreographer has to have that kind of very thick, mind to really survive and being there. It's very, yeah. So.
Thank you, Cameron. You're nodding, and we also have a question from the audience. So before I ask it, any thoughts on what Shimazaki-sensei was saying.
No, I was nodded because I definitely feel that, having to constantly fight when you start something new, like, oh, like, is this worse than the last thing I made? Like, was the last thing I made even good? Am I going up? Am I going down? Like, which direction am I going? I totally, I totally feel that, That's all I have to say. That's why I was nodding, because it's a lifestyle.
All right, so from the audience, going back to cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, do your cross-cultural experiences give you new insight into your own cultural identity? How do you internalize and implement this creative vocabulary? So do your cross-cultural experiences give you insight into your own cultural identity? Well, ask that first, and then if they do, how do you internalize and implement this creative vocabulary? Cameron, can we start with you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's I think similarly to what we were saying before, it's a constant negotiation, internally and externally. I would say, speaking from my own personal experience, I feel like I didn't really quite tap into that experience of being a Black American until I was the only Black American, right? The first time I went to Japan, because here we're so multicultural, and even in Vermont, where there was a substantially small African American or Black population, or BIPOC population at all while I was there, you still kind of saw people around. You're like, okay, I know I'm not alone out here. There's somebody, on the other side of the room. I think the first time I went to Japan in college, and I was one of two Black people I think I saw for the first 6 weeks I was there. You really start to think about yourself and like where you place in a wider global cultural context. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that directly affected my movement at that time, mm-hmm. But I think it just kind of helped awaken me to a greater contextual placing of my own identity, in both of my own art making, but also in how the art that I make is seen on a wider context outside of just where I was in college. Because at the time when I was in college, it's like my whole world was college, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have anywhere to go. It's Middlebury. There's no party, right? So you have nowhere to go. And so stepping outside of that, and also being isolated in my own identity, amongst a more homogeneous population, like it, I think it just broadened awareness of like, oh, this is actually who I am. This is actually how I'm seen from the outside. Mm-hmm. And an awareness that I am being seen from the outside. I think that's also something that came up too, because when you're here, in college, but also especially in New York, like you blend in. Nobody cares who you are, right? Nobody cares. But then when I go over to Japan, everyone cares who I am, and everyone cares why I'm there and why I speak Japanese, and like, why are you here, right? So yeah, that kind of difference.
So interesting. Before we go to the second part of that question, I'm curious because, having spent so many years in sort of cultural exchange, and even today, I think of all of anybody who practices or who works at an organization that tries to promote cultural exchange, I mean, all of us believe profoundly that the best way to secure a better future for the world is person-to-person exchange. But I think the conversation now that is so important that we need to have is who are the people involved in person-to-person exchange? And when we talk about sort of the U.S. Japan cultural exchange relationship, who is the American who's going over, and how can we increase opportunities to really have better representation in our cultural exchange programs? I think as a person of color, I think, how do we increase sort of BIPOC communities embarking on cultural exchange programs.
Well, if I might offer an idea, learn Japanese.
Sure,
Just saying, you know, when you come to someone else's culture, and you it's basically like an olive branch. Like you're saying, like I appreciate you and who you are when you come from enough to take this time for myself to try to meet you halfway, instead of just showing up. Just an idea.
A great idea too. And can you tell us a little bit about, there's a question here, a little bit about your recent project On the Rise, Young Choreographers of Color?
Oh yeah, sure. Long story short, that was a commission I received from Alfred University last fall. And I was commissioned as a curator to curate a series of new dance films by young Black choreographers, mostly based in the city, but one was based in Missouri. And they made a series of really amazing short dance films, which then collected for a larger event. But it was just a way of trying to give people whose voice I felt weren't being heard enough, a chance to create as Black creators without the pressure of making something that immediately addresses, and usually presenters want you to somehow solve the issues of social justice and social unrest as a Black creator through the art that you're making. So it's just a chance to say, I see that you are a creator who is also Black, and I see that sometimes you don't want to make work that's around social justice. So here's a chance to make work that you actually, and a myriad of other topics that you're interested in as a creator.
So important. I'm so glad you shared that. I'm conscious of the time. This always happens. We have about 5 minutes left. There is one question from the audience that I want to make sure we don't lose, but maybe you can be super brief. I'll pose it to both of you in your answers, and then we'll invite Paige back in, or actually Paige is right here. So very quickly, last question, Shimazaki Sensei and Cameron, from the audience. Just at the heart of the collaboration, what kind of verbal and nonverbal physical communication do you two engage in to weave your works together? An audience member is very interested in this process. Verbal and nonverbal physical communication.
Well, I mean, we haven't had a chance to have the intangible part happen quite as much because we haven't been in as close physical contact, because we haven't been able to meet up. So there's that. I mean, verbal, we talk on WhatsApp. I mean, he just called me earlier today on WhatsApp. And then and email and things also. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah. So as much as we sort of are sad about the sort of two-dimensional quality of technology and enabling, for now at least, communication, I think that there is silver lining maybe in it, at that it allows us to put us in touch very quickly. Shimazaki Sensei, do you have just 20 seconds to that question? Nonverbal and verbal communication that you've been taking to work on this piece.
No, maybe some of you think that it's already has started, we've been doing something. Now, as I said, it's a very difficult moment right now but now we try using technology as much as we can. So it's up to now, it's verbal, up to now, this is the only thing we can do now. Yeah, but it's the question before that, I thought it's very interesting that it's me, of course, I'm Japanese, but educated in Canada a long time, and I worked in Europe, but just look at Japan, there's McDonald's there, 7-Eleven, everybody think McDonald's, 7-Eleven are Japanese, or these Japanese kids, they thought, they went to America, they were so shocked, there's a McDonald's there, so our culture is so mixed now that so I'm not living in a samurai era, right? So me being a Japanese means that I am a Japanese who eat hamburger, you know, and you know, eat sushi sometime. Like it's all completely mixed. And if I try to be as honest as I can in my choreography, that should come out. That I am quarter of me is almost like American, you know. Not because I went abroad. It's just living in here.
Right.
That's how it is. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect sort of note to pass it over to Paige in terms of having all these very, very interesting and insightful conversations.
Miho, thank you so much for the smooth facilitation of a really interesting conversation. I've been so engaged, and really I could listen for another hour, but I know that's not possible. Thank you so much for moderating. And Shimazaki Sensei and Cameron, thank you for taking the time and for embarking on this wonderful journey with us. I took away really just sort of like three thoughts, and they all sort of begin with the P. I mean, you both clearly have passion. You have passion for your craft, and you have just passion for life, and you found a way to pursue your passion in a way that is allowing you to be creative and bridge builders at the same time. And you've certainly been perseverant. You've persevered not only through this pandemic, but all of the things that life throws at us. I was really just interested in the fact that both of you maybe started thinking you were going to pursue one path and found yourselves doing something else. One was going to, you know, be riding horses. The other was going to be a diplomat. And here you are, both in very different places than you had imagined, but clearly finding yourself in the right place where you can pursue your personal dreams. And person was the other piece of it. You know, you're tapping into your personal identities. You're sharing your personal stories, and you're also really just being a part of, you know, a new personal history and a journey. And so, you know, I really just admire the individuals that you are and the talents that you have. And thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. And especially because at the Commission, not only are we supporting creative expression, but we're also concerned about and supporting the next generation. I think both of you represent that there's no one clear line that one should pursue. And so when you do pursue your passion and explore all kinds of opportunities and seek mentorship and people who are supportive, whether they're your parents or whether you're teachers and instructors or colleagues, anything is possible. And so I'm really hoping that you will find the opportunity to share the same physical space. But thank you for joining this virtual space this evening and this morning, and giving us just a taste of what we can look forward to in the future. So again, thank you so much, Shimazaki Sensei and Cameron and Miho, NEA, iHouse. And I have to also thank the Embassy of the United States government, the embassy in Tokyo, that housed our last experience and personal experience before the COVID pandemic. And thank you for that wonderful collaboration with Cameron and Soya-san. So good night, good morning, and stay tuned. Bye-bye.